Today is January the 10th, 2020. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University, and I am in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to speak with Kandi Wilson. And this is part of our STEM Areas and Women project for the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. And Kandi is the supply chain manager with Williams Companies. So thank you for letting me come today. Let's begin with learning when and where you were born.
I was born in Clinton, Oklahoma in 1980.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about your parents.
They were, um, so my dad, he was Hispanic, and so, his parents had uh, come over. His grandparents were actually immigrants from Mexico. And so, small town in Texas, really one of the only big Hispanic families there. And so he met my mother while she was also working in the oil field because her dad owned two oil field companies that did some service. So my mother didn't ever graduate from high school. My father did, but they met. And then they got married when she was 8 months pregnant with me, and she had just turned 18. So, but it was, I just have um, I actually have very little memories of, them. I think prior to, most of my memories are of them when he was a pastor and had really, I think, made a change. So, yeah.
What were each of them doing in the oil field? I mean, what was their
I think that they were both like hauling. There was always this story about how he saw her at the gas pump and he drove off with the nozzle still in his truck. And um, so, yeah.
That would have been in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s? No. And I'm doing my math. It's when she was born. So they would not have met till the
So probably
70s.
78, 79.
Okay. I'll do my math.
Yeah.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have four younger brothers.
Oh, you're the oldest plus the only girl.
Yeah.
Oh, that was interesting, I bet.
I think it was, I'm pretty rough and tumble sometimes, but I think you kind of have to be when you have four younger brothers. So, yeah.
Yeah, that could have helped along the way.
Yeah. Little bossy, kind of their mom at the same time.
Well, did you grow up in the Clinton area or did you move a couple of times?
We moved when I was about 8 or 9 years old. We moved to Alva, Oklahoma, so up in the northwest by the Panhandle. And my dad at that time had felt that he had a calling to be, a pastor. And so we moved up there to Alva, Oklahoma, and that's really where I spent the majority of my childhood years.
Okay. And where would you go to school? Take us through that.
So I was homeschooled, and I say that in the loosest sense. And it was very much founded on very deep religious beliefs. And so I was taken out of school when I was in the third grade. I went back to school in the sixth grade and then was taken out after that, and there wasn't much schooling after that.
So would you have gotten a high school diploma through the homeschooling route, or how did that
I think
work?
optimally that's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
I actually left home when I was 16 and had, in hindsight, always been a very independent mind, very rational, didn't accept a lot of the, what I thought was vague reasoning around why we did certain things, with regards to, religion. And so left home when I was 16 and did everything that a cliche pastor's daughter you ever hear about would do, maybe then some. And so really struck out on my own path after that. But at the age of 18, I had just turned 18, I went and got my GED.
Okay. Were you already interested in math at that point, or did that come?
No,
That
in
came
fact,
later?
Um, and I had always tested out, at higher levels. I was obsessed with reading. I taught myself to read when I was about 3 and a half. My parents were working night shift at a factory in Clinton, and so I had this little yellow tablet, and occasionally I'll see them when someone posts, one of those, remember this vintage toy meme? And but I just remember being sucked into books, and math was one of those things, and maybe it was the application of schooling. My mom didn't have her high school diploma, so she was trying to learn it and then teach it to me. And I thought books were far more interesting, and that's what I got grounded from when I got in trouble. So
Did you get to the library? Was
I
there a
did. That was at that time, and it's interesting because I would never let my daughters do it now, where I would bike across town. And um, and what's interesting is, there was also, I think in the 80s, there was, a lot of, beware of new age type books and all of these things that have symbolism in them. And so I would secret myself away in a corner and down, because the children's library was in the basement. And I would pull all of these fairy tale books, and was just getting sucked into, what was still, to me, is still my favorite genre, fantasy and sci-fi fiction. So
Did you have a favorite one? If you looking back,
looking back, I can't tell you that there was a particular name I remember. I remember themes.
okay.
And it's been a little frustrating because there were some favorite stories where I will go onto Google and try to kind of Google out what I thought was the narrative just to see if I can pull up the book title. Um, but it was always fantasy and sci-fi fiction.
Cool. That's an interesting path you have taken.
Yeah.
So were you working at 18 then?
I was working at 16.
At 16.
And so when I moved out, I was working at a convenience store, and I moved in, conveniently with a girl who was also working there. And when I moved out, our religion was very, what I would say, Orthodox Pentecostal. So I had never cut my hair, had never worn makeup, never put on jeans, never put on jewelry. And so the very first night, as I was 16 and I moved out, I cut my hair to my shoulders. I put on jeans for the first time, put on makeup for the first time, promptly got drunk on a bottle of Strawberry Hill. I don't know what it was, like cheap, cheap wine, whatever it was. But I look back on those days, and as they really weren't that wild if you compare it to today's activities. But I look back on that and I see, somebody who was really stretching, like stretching wings, and, pushing back against everything that had been taught or had been ingrained over the years.
But you were also supporting yourself
I
and
was.
acting like an adult in other ways
Yes.
too. Hmm. Well, did you mend that relationship with your parents?
It's been off and on. I think that we came to an understanding that there was love in the family. Um, for the first few years, I know it was really hard on my dad. Um, and I think that there finally just became tolerance. And
Mm-hmm.
it was, we love each other. You believe what you want to believe. I'm going to believe what I want to believe. But at the end of the day, we're still family.
Okay. Did your brothers follow your path? Any of them?
Yes.
Okay.
Um, I have two brothers who have their high school diplomas. Um, the next one down, um, he moved out, I think, when he was probably 15 or 16. And he actually kept putting himself, through high school. And then the next one down from that, He ran away when he was 14, and he came to live, and he kind of bounced back and forth between myself and my other brother. And then there was there were a couple of really great families that, said, we know him, we would love to take him in. So he got through high school. I it was really tough trying to put him into high school because he had, I think it was like a third grade comprehension of reading, and then maybe a fourth or fifth grade comprehension of math. But that first year in high school, he buckled down. He was in the special ed classes. And so by the time he finished his ninth grade year, he was on par.
Yeah.
So
he had the brain power,
he had the brain power and then the persistence
and the desire. Yes.
Yeah.
You were a good role model for him, I would think. It sounds like you would have been. So once you're 18, and then.
So I'm 18. I have my GED. I'm still, I would say, validating my sense of self by what society would consider to be typical. So that was, did I have a boyfriend? Was I partying? How attractive was I? And so I became pregnant at the age of 18. And it was a very interesting time in my life. I look back on that now, and I have a 19-year-old daughter now. And so when I do those comparisons, I was a child who was having a child, and we were having to really grow up together. And so went through, got married. And then there was a very amicable divorce a couple of years later. And at that point, I was living in Kansas. And so, I'm at the age of 22. I come back to Oklahoma and am still in this, cycle of life, I think, where my self-worth was determined by, having a family and still, being somewhat traditional. So married again, and this time it was someone kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. And what I will say is that through all of those years, there was just a very deep sense of unhappiness and feeling like I needed to do something more, but also feeling very trapped. Felt like I was destined to, kind of repeat these cycles of poverty and, just would not be able to dig myself up and out. So by the age of, I was 25, about to turn 26. I gave birth to my twins, who are 13 now. So I had 3 young daughters, and I really, when I look back on that, I was working at Walmart, and throughout this whole time, it was always a job. It was always, grinding to get the paycheck, understanding that, you still had to support. And when I had the twins, I realized there was something that this, I don't know if it's parental instinct or just this immediate drive that kicks in to acknowledge that you have to be more, you have to do more. And I had these 3 young girls who were looking at me to show them the way. So I enrolled in college, and that was really scary.
And at 26, yeah.
Yeah, I had just turned 26. I had, the twins were 8 weeks old. I started in that January, in that spring semester. I took up a newspaper route that I would run at 3 a.m. in the morning. And, I tell people, when I say that I don't really quite remember the first year of their lives, I really don't quite remember it. Like, it was feeding, it was exhausting. I remember, I was in English Comp 1, and since they were twins, they both fit into one baby bouncer, that I would sit on the floor and I would bounce that with my foot while I was typing out essays. And um, but it was, I think at the end of the day, you're when all of the motivation, so everything that's inspiring you to go, when all of that has gone, it's still, I think, grit and persistence that you realize that there is an objective that you have to get to, and an unwavering focus on that objective. So I started out with a criminal justice degree. To me that sounded very glamorous, and I just knew, it was going to be like CSI. And I remember at the time, proudly proclaiming to anyone, who asked what I was doing, that it was criminal justice, and here's everything I was going to do, which I think is a little humorous now, because that's not necessarily, what a degree in that field would actually do. And what I think is interesting is that I took a placement exam before going into college, and that put me in all of the remedial courses except for language and literature. And I attribute that to just having a very broad, just vacuuming in books since I was little. So I was in your most basic algebra course that there could be. And as I was working through it, I remember probably the second week in class, just sitting there terrified that the teacher would call on me, to where my face felt hot and I was trying to make myself as invisible as possible, because I'm surrounded by all of these very young, bright, what I think are bright students. And here I am, this exhausted mom who, now that it's 15 years later, I'm like, I was still young, but I felt very much not a part of that classroom, and actually felt very overwhelmed, felt like I wasn't worth anything, like why was I doing this, why did I think that I had the just the mental skill set to carry this through. And so I'm sitting there and I'm questioning everything about myself, everything about my life. Why am I here in college? This is clearly, I'm not worthy enough to be here. And she didn't call on me. So that was, the great part about that. But what I remember is maybe the third exam in that class, I scored 100%, like on, kind of that third exam. And I remember feeling very proud, but then I also started to feel very calm when I was in math, and really enjoyed working through the problems. And then I would say there was a turning point in a very specific person who was, she's now one of my closest friends. And so Dr. Gadasik, she was my language and literature professor, and I had her for Comp 2. And so that was the second semester. And I saw this person who took an interest in me beyond all of those labels that I was. I wasn't a poor single mom to her. I wasn't someone who wasn't smart enough. And she actively mentored, and then I did an independent study with her. But I started to, I think in that time frame, start to understand that I was worth something as a woman. I was worth something as a mother, and that I actually could chase a dream. So I'm still working my way through math. I'm still, about a year and a half into this criminal justice degree. And I remember at this point, I'm taking still, those remedial courses, but I'm working my way up steadily to college algebra. And I started to realize that my sense of enjoyment was not necessarily from just doing math. It was coming from a sense of math also not caring about any of the labels that I had. And there was a purity to math in that there was always going to be an answer. It may not look like the answer you need, but there is always an answer, and it's very black and white. There's nothing that is subjective, like it was what it was. And to me, that was, it just felt like, okay, this is what I'm chasing. I'm chasing something that doesn't have, all of the emotional entanglements, and, is something that feels, again, very pure in nature. And I felt at peace when I was doing it. So, single mom, I was working 3 part-time jobs at that point because that's how I had to be able to still bring home money, but also accommodate a college schedule. And that's where another key woman came into my life, which was Dr. Bauer. And so she was over the computer science department. And I decided to take a computer science course. And then she encouraged me to apply for some scholarships, and then also apply for a NASA research grant that was funded, through I think it's called NASA EPSCoR within Oklahoma. And then I also applied for a year-long internship, and I managed to get all of those. And so I would go to the Stafford Air and Space Museum. I started to tutor in the math department. And then I would also, in the summer, I worked as a census worker, like through the census. And I just remember there were different points along those last 3 years of college where it was so tempting to throw in the towel and to go get a job that would pay at least $35,000, because we were really poor. And I tell the girls about it now, but I'm like, don't you remember, our favorite meal? It was macaroni and cheese, and I would dump in a can of tuna and a can of corn, and we were buying ramen in bulk, and which that's very different now. But it was those times that I think I still held with an iron resolve to the expectation of myself that I would get through it and that there was something on the other side. Mm-hmm. So I started interviewing for a job, and this was in my senior year. I was really worried. I was worried that employers would look at my lack of high school diploma. Mm. What I realized is that nobody really cares about it when they see your college degree. So I got 2 offers, and that was from State Farm and then one from Chesapeake. And Chesapeake, that was the company you wanted to work for, 10 years ago. And their offer came in like maybe $5,000 or $6,000 higher. And I started at $45,000 a year. And I felt, it was just one of those things where I'm like, I made it, like I did it. So I graduated on a Saturday, and I started work on that very next Monday.
What year would that have been?
That would have been 2011.
Okay. What?
So
at what point did you switch your major then from criminal justice to math?
It was a year and a half into starting college.
So you switched it to just mathematics?
To just mathematics. Um, I also met my husband in the tutor room. And so he was a couple of years ahead of me. And he was a tutor, and I had actually gone in because I had a problem in trigonometry, which, I walked in and I said, hey, can you take a look at this? And he said, well, sure, let me read through and see where you're at. And I waited patiently for about 2 minutes. And then I said, you know what, that's okay. I think you can go ask a professor. And so what he did as soon as I left the room was swivel around the sign-in sheet and said, that's the person that I don't want to talk to again. And so probably 2.5 years later, we're both, he was just graduating and I was still about a year and a half out from graduating. We became really great friends. And then, we've been together ever since. So
he's also math then.
Yes, so
you could talk that language together.
Yes, we talk that language together, and we all wear glasses in our family. We're kind of this little nerdy family, and
well, who were keeping the 3 girls while you were? I mean, how were you arranging childcare during that?
So the twins went. So Sydney was in school, and the twins went to daycare.
You had to make enough money to.
You had to make enough money to pay for daycare and enough money to pay for rent and bills and then groceries, and it was exhausting.
And transportation of some kind.
Mm-hmm. It was exhausting. It was a complete grind. I remember on graduation day feeling really giddy, like feeling the magic of the moment and thinking I had made it. And then I remember starting work the very next Monday and thinking, oh, I'm back at the bottom again. And but it was, one of the things that I appreciate about math and what I love about it is that it's teaching you a different way to think. It's teaching you, it goes back to there's always an answer. It may not be the answer that you'd like, but there's always an answer, and it might look a little bit messy, and that's okay. And with math, the biggest skill set in hindsight was that it taught me how to think in a critical manner. It taught me how to really disassociate emotion and to really think through and rationalize and prove everything out and to use logic and to apply that. And so I started, quickly, just working because work hard. It doesn't matter if you're cleaning a bathroom or, if you're working at Chesapeake, you still got to bring the same amount of effort. And so brought that work ethic and, started to make my way up from, a very basic measurement analyst, to senior measurement analyst, and then from senior measurement analyst to a supervisor. And at that point, we had been spun off into a different company, and so Williams then acquired the company I was working for in Oklahoma City. And that's where there was a third key figure in my life, and that was Melissa McKillen. And so I saw this person come in who was telling me why I should come over with Williams. And what I thought was interesting is that I had very much been in a fairly male-dominated subset of the oil and gas industry. And it was not only male-dominated, but, very much with engineers and, people that I still thought were far smarter than I was. And then I see this person who's taking over, and she's a woman, and she's been doing all kinds of different things in her career. And she's not behaving like any other engineer that I've ever seen. And, she had passion, and she was authentic. And one of the things that I always told her was that if, I had to really weigh out what she was offering. And I ultimately came to the decision that if 50% of what she was saying was true and the other 50% was BS, I was still okay with the 50% that was true, so therefore I would come over to Williams. And so then she asked, she said, well, how did that work out? I'm pretty sure I was telling you the truth the whole time. And I said, you were. I mean, it took me a year, I was a little skeptical. But I saw this person who wasn't afraid to be vulnerable, who wasn't afraid um, to acknowledge that maybe, not knowing everything about a subject, it's not that it makes you less smart, it just means that that's not your area of expertise yet. And she really started to push me to become a lot more confident. I used to be terrified when it came to public speaking. And I would start to sweat, my knees would, tremble, my hands were sweaty. I would rock back and forth. And so what she started doing was to really kind of put me into these spaces where I was a little bit uncomfortable, but then I started to gain that comfort and, eventually worked my way into giving a keynote speech, which I just thought was terrifying, but, pulled it off and had really prepared. And when I stop and I reflect, and this was probably a couple of years ago, and I think back to the girl who started her journey and, the person who was really just really trying, at that point I had 3 reasons, and those were my daughters. And I wanted them to be so proud of me. And I really wanted to create a life for them, which was the life that I had only read about in books. And so I was really, really happy to measure that progress and to understand how far I had come and had been able to provide a life, for my daughters that would give them those opportunities. And then to, send my oldest off to college, and, she was all A's and she had gotten scholarships, and, just to be so immensely proud. It was a hard road, but without that hard road, I wouldn't be so appreciative of what I have now. So
That's been over 30 years if I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what was, that one, can you track it back to what that particular moment you decided, okay, I'm going to college? You've thought about this a lot. Can you, what was like a final straw or something that pushed you that direction?
I had the twins, and they were about 4 weeks old, and I was facing going back to Walmart, after maternity leave. And, Sydney was about 7 at the time, my oldest. And you always have a sense inside of you that you're supposed to do something else. I was supposed to be doing something better, something more. And at that point, I decided I was going to do it. And then once that decision was made, it was no turning back.
How do you make it happen, I guess?
How do you make it happen? And it was, it was perseverance. It was grit when all else was failing. And I just remember sometimes I would be up late at night studying, and I was so exhausted from working, the multiple jobs and trying to be a good mom and trying to just survive and to keep our, family, going, but also trying to convince myself that there was indeed going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. I wasn't seeing it yet, but I had this conviction that the hard work would pay off. And then when all of that has failed, it was really just continuing to just put one foot in front of the other. And because it's almost like muscle memory where you don't even know how you're doing it. You don't know how you're continuing to walk forward. You don't know, how you're, subsisting on, so little hours of sleep, but um, you just had to do it.
Did you have a support network? Any friends that would
I did have a
give
couple
some
of
relief?
friends, and they have similar success stories. There was one, well, I had two. So, one friend of mine, she, we had actually met each other when I had moved back to Oklahoma. Our daughters were of similar age. We were both, young single moms. Um, and she started to put herself through school. And so now she is a nurse practitioner.
Mm.
And another friend of mine, I grew to know her and love her because she happened to be dating my brother's best friend. But we were also in the same mathematics program at Southwestern, and she's now secondary education, and she was also a young mom. Um, and and I'm so incredibly proud of both of them because our journeys, I think, each in their own separate way, were very, very difficult.
Kind of supported each other in a sense too.
Mm-hmm.
Encouraged each other. Well, in your first remedial math class, were there mostly males or females students with you?
I think it was a mix.
It was a mix.
What I will say is that as it kept advancing higher, that's when you had more males who were strict mathematic majors, and then more of the females were on the mathematics education side.
Okay, I can see that.
Once I really enjoyed tutoring, but I also quickly realized that I did not have the patience to teach. Um, which is ironic because one of the things that I'm most passionate about now in my job is mentoring and teaching and, really helping those around me to really understand their worth and, to be, um, I guess, to be proud of themselves in the sense that, this is all a journey. Every single one of us is on a very separate journey, and we're all bringing very different backgrounds. And that influences our decisions, that influences our perspectives, and it's just that acceptance and tolerance. So,
Do the ones that you work with now, are they aware of your path to get here?
what's interesting about that is I was asked to do a diversity and inclusion moment this past fall. And up until this past fall, I've been very private. There were a few key people I had told, just people that I was very close to that I felt accepted by no matter what. And something that I found out about myself was that I still did not truly believe that I was worthy, especially when I was asked to do the diversity and inclusion moment and to speak about my past. And that terrified me because I felt that I would not be accepted if people knew about my past. That they would see the person who I was now and their perception of who I was now would change if they knew what my journey was. And let me tell you, that was a very deep moment of self-reflection to where I had to, um, really just decide to be brave and to be vulnerable and to be okay doing that. And so I put together some statistics or what I could find. And because really what I wanted to show them was one, here's why diversity is important, here's why inclusion is important. Now here are the things that you know about me now. And I showed pictures, of my family, I was pulling things, like my college diploma and really just all of the snapshots that anyone who's around me would say, oh yeah, that's Kandi. Yeah, that's what we know about her. And so I went to the next slide and I said, but I said, here are the things that you don't know about me. Here is the background that influences the perspective that I bring into this workplace. And I talked about the fact, that, I had a GED. I had never even completed schooling past ninth grade. And that's relative when we say ninth grade. And, that I was a single mom by, the time I was 18, and that I didn't go to college until I was 26, and that I had three young kids, that I was fighting for at that time. And I say fighting for in the sense of everything I was doing was centered around them being my driving purpose. And so I then went into the statistics, which was, it's really extraordinarily difficult to actually figure it out. But I wanted to know um, if someone had not graduated, how many of those went on to get their GED? And then from those who get their GED, how many of those go on to college? And then from those who go on to college, how many of them actually graduate? And then of those who actually graduate, how many land the type of job that I had? Mm-hmm. And I think it worked out to be like a 0.0002%. And so I just pointed at that and I said, that is me. And what I will say is that that journey has taught me to be compassionate as a leader. It's taught me tolerance. It's taught me that, we don't know anybody's life story from their surface. And I think those are all things that have helped me to be successful without me realizing that they were helping me to be successful. Yeah.
Well, did anyone's impression change if you were afraid it would?
No, what's interesting is
I would think.
I had a young woman who pulled me aside afterwards, and she's probably, she was someone that we had brought on, and I was just so impressed. I mean, like, she's an engineer and she's incredibly smart and, gone through school and college, and she wanted to tell me that what I had said made her respect for me be that much larger. And that, for someone like me to get up there and then to talk about that and to talk about my journey, it was just like it meant a lot to her. Had several others, like it was interesting. It was a little uncomfortable, and I was trying not to make it uncomfortable. I wanted really for them to take away that, anything's possible, and any person you're talking to, we're not sure on the road that they've traveled. And, but it was interesting how, in the days afterwards, people would come and say, I had no idea. And they would ask questions, and I would, be a little candid and, throw in some humor, because some of it is a little humorous. But, yeah.
Well, the two doc professors that were significant to your undergrad degree, did they come to graduation? Do you recall if they did?
So, Dr. Gadasik, so she was at my graduation. I actually went ahead and invited Mrs. Miller, who was my remedial math course teacher, and, wanted to say thank you. Thank you for being that person who helped me find my stride.
For not asking you a question in class.
Yes, for not asking me a question in class. And, for continuing to encourage me in a pursuit that I didn't feel like I was worthy enough to pursue.
You wonder if she had not been your teacher, if your path would have been different, if you had been asked a question by a male professor even
Yeah.
in math if it would have made a difference. I don't know.
Yeah.
You were determinate of it might not have made a difference. I don't know. Were many of your professors in math after that, most of them male, or were there
Oh, yeah.
a mix, mostly male?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you applied for your first job there at Chesapeake, did you know any of the competition, if they were men or women that you were going up against for the position? You might not know that. But.
I don't think I didn't really know that. I think, to be honest, I think that the perspective was that, women were more in the office, to do that piece, while, the engineers and the, technicians and all of that, those were the guys out in the field. What's interesting is that, having grown up in the household that I did with a father who did construction, I was on a roofing by the time I was 11, and was helping my dad out on jobs. And so I've always been a little mechanically inclined. I love doing anything with my hands. And so I think I probably didn't fit the normal mold of someone who would come in and just be very content, to do the in the office job. I wanted to know about the instrumentation, and I was asking, the more kind of senior specialists, can you show me how this works? Like, can you explain to me the calculations behind it? And, really wanted to put my hands on it. And I think that has had something to do with my success as well as credibility. Because I wasn't afraid to get my hands dirty, wasn't afraid to get out in the field with the technician, and really, was just bringing, I think, my own sense of self into it.
What was your title?
I was a measurement analyst. Yeah.
Were most of them male at that point?
Most of the measurement analysts in the office were all women.
Women, okay.
Because, that's where we belonged, was in the office.
Okay, I got you.
And it was very rare that you would ever find a female technician, out in the field, out in operations.
And there wasn't any males measurement in the office?
There were a couple.
Okay, so.
But it was like an 80 to 20% ratio, yeah.
You wonder if they got paid more. Back in those days, back in those days, they tended to pay men more, even if it was the same work.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't think so. I think there was. Well, I don't know.
So you moved from Alva into Oklahoma City at that point?
So I moved from Weatherford. So I had actually completed school in Weatherford at Southwestern Oklahoma State.
Okay.
And then moved from there to Mustang. I will say I commuted back and forth for about 18 months. So that was an hour drive each way. That was exhausting. But I didn't have the means yet to actually move there. And my support network was still in Weatherford. And to try and, I think, try and think that, I could actually do the move. And by that time, my now husband and I were dating. It was at that point still, we don't know where this is going. Like, we don't know where life is taking us. We have these jobs. And, but I remember too, that commute, it was, that almost made me give up that job a couple of times.
Well, when you made the decision to move to Tulsa, or did you commute for a while too?
Well, so we moved from Oklahoma City to Tulsa, and so this was about 3 years ago. And I wasn't the one commuting. My husband was, because he worked at Chesapeake by that point. And so he was commuting back and forth from Tulsa to Oklahoma City for about 3 or 4 months until he got a job here at Williams as well. So
he followed you.
Yeah.
It's usually the other way
Yeah.
around. Right.
Yeah.
So when did you all get married? What year?
Oh, he's gonna hate this. If he sees this, I always struggle to remember the year. It took me the longest time to remember the actual date. But it was December 17th. I think we're going on 6 years now, I think. Um, so 2014, 2015.
Okay,
Yeah.
close enough.
Yeah.
So how did the discussion when you decided to move? I mean, what was the deciding factor?
We really evaluated both where
Both
we were
of you.
both at in our careers.
Okay.
And it was one of those where we, had worked up. We knew that they were shutting down the Oklahoma City office where I was working. And we said, okay, this is what makes sense for our family. And so, dependent on, what is offered, this is the direction that we will go, because this is what has to make sense for us in order for us to move. So it was, lots of different scenarios spelled out in a spreadsheet, and, a lot of
Logical, critical
a
thinking.
very logical. We really wanted to make sure that we were being very objective. And so then when I did get my offer, and, my husband has been one of my biggest supporters, in this whole journey. And he said, I think we focus on your career. And he said, I'll commute back and forth and I'll look for a job there. And it's worked out.
Historically, women are considered intuitive and emotional. You've been able to keep those in check, and
I keep it in check. What I have found as I grow older is that intuition, I think, is almost a secret little superpower. And I think if we can tap into it, but still, set the emotion aside, that intuition is, I think, one of those secret leader skill sets that no one really tells you about. Yeah.
Well, I was reading you went back got a master's degree at some point.
I did. So that was 2 years. Let's see, 2 years prior to before we moved, because I graduated, I believe, in December of 2016. And that was tough. I had just had our youngest, and so she's 5 years old now. And I decided that at that point, I had enough energy to pursue a master's. I didn't know if I was going to have the energy as I got further into my career. And so it was another one of those moments where I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. And I think I can do this. I remember, a couple of those courses where, I was going into the office on the weekends, so that I could focus and try to get, the assignments done. And, 7 hours later, I've got tears rolling down my face because I'm still trying to figure out, something, and feeling incredibly discouraged, but just continuing to push through. And it was something. It was just that drive to, finish what I had started, no matter how, discouraging it felt, no matter how. And I would say, when you're in a master's program and you're surrounded by professionals, some of them, whip sharp, and, and some of them are, at levels that you don't think that you're ever going to get to in your career. It's intimidating. And I think that was the same level of intimidation for me that the level of intimidation was when I started my undergrad. It was a different playing field. And I just continued to work at it. I would, ask for help. I would, just continue to work through example by example. And what I will say is that that has led me to realize that, I'm never going to be the smartest person in the room. And that's okay. I don't have to be. But what I tell myself is that I damn well sure be the hardest working. And, it's because it's that hard work that takes me across the finish line. And going across that finish line was really, really important.
And what was it in? Well, your master's.
So it's an MBA with a focus in energy. So,
So more accounting, finance.
well, it was accounting, finance, negotiation, your leadership. So very much set up like a traditional MBA, but your depth, like the subjects that you're working on. So your analyses and all of that is more centered around companies or scenarios that would be in the energy industry.
So still a math focus.
Hmm.
For most of them, were there other women in going
There
through with
were,
you?
yeah, there were other women. I will say that there were three others from my company that we were all in the same program together, and we were like, hey, like, what if we did this? And the other three were guys. And but what I will tell you is that as I've progressed in my career and as I've learned more about people, more about myself, the more I realize that gender really doesn't have anything to do with it. Um, you have males who are nurturers, you have males who struggle to advocate for themselves, you have males who go who are on the other opposite end of the spectrum where, it's that traditional, oh, here's the, um, this person, if you're in a conference room, the guy who thinks, that he only knows 20%, he's going to volunteer, but the woman thinks that she needs to know 100% before she can volunteer. And I've seen it both ways. I've seen women who are strong advocates for themselves, um, and you start to really realize that it's personality and it is story driven, that everybody's past, it doesn't matter.
And then along those same lines, knowing that, then how do you get more young women interested in the STEM math
So
and
I
stuff?
actually started, what I was afforded an opportunity in was, I did some stuff with Women in Science organization here in Oklahoma. And I really was so passionate about involving young girls. Um, but what I will say is that um, in my journey to bring STEM related experiences to young kids, and I started, my company was fantastic in that it allowed us to volunteer. And so we put together a ragtag team of people who we just all love science. There were males, there were females, and we would go to, the inner city schools in Oklahoma City and try to coordinate through our company, can we come and do a demo? Can we answer questions? Um, what I started to see at that point was that young girls were very interested. Um, I think probably around that seventh, eighth grade, you can start to see the pressures of, and I don't think that I'm too dumb to do that. There's this type of pressure around, these are the types of girls that are popular.
Mm.
And, and so what I would say though is that when I was in those classrooms and in these inner city schools, I saw the same burning desire in a young boy's eyes that I saw in a young girl's eyes. And I saw kids who were just looking for that glimpse that there could potentially be something better in their life, that they didn't have to repeat their cycle. And so that's where I started, to really understand that um, we need a continued focus on helping, young girls um, feel like, that, the STEM fields are just as important. And that it's okay to be a complete nerd. And in fact, it's actually pretty hip now and pretty cool. Um, but that it's, it's also okay to pursue a lot of different passions. And that even if you are technically inclined, you can also be incredibly creative and to understand that there's a broad scope.
So what's your other side then?
So my other side is that I'm actually very creative. You know, I love to bake. I love to, and I think really it's just proving that I can do something. I wanted to see if I could do a fondant cake, and so did a trial run, and then I did a secondary run, and it turned out really fantastic. And it was, oh, wouldn't you want to start your own bakery? And I thought, that sounds like a horrible idea. Because, for me, it was more about the challenge. I needed a challenge to sink my teeth into. But,
Thinking that's measurement again. It's math and measuring your
yeah,
ingredients.
I really just, and I think you can see it in my twins. It's, my husband says if somebody were to take you and split you down the middle, like that's them, because you have one she announced to us one night that she was going to teach her robot, she was teaching her robot how to do her math homework for her because she didn't like doing her math homework. And my husband said, do you think she knows that like she's having to do the math homework in order to teach the robot, And I said, well, we're not going to tell her that right now. She loves Legos. I love Legos. I love building, and she, loves to read. And then my other daughter, so her twin sister, she plays the violin. She does a lot of painting, and I see, a lot of my creativity come out of her as well. So
good mix.
Good mix.
And the older daughter's math, you said too, didn't you?
So she's in business. She has said she's looking at doing a minor in engineering because she misses her math classes, and wants to run a nonprofit at some point, which I'm really proud of. And there's also this, I see this in my daughters and it's in me as well, just this entrepreneurial, like you want to own something, you want to go out and you want to do something that will change and you want to effect change, and so yeah.
So you'll be pursuing a PhD at some point then.
I've considered it. I think for me it's also weighing, is the ROI worth it? So is my return on investment going to be worth my time spent earning a PhD?
And you were doing something at lean leadership. I have no clue what that.
So I did get my Lean Six Sigma certification through the OSU Lean Institute, and so really it's just it's a course that's marrying up really this mindset of eliminating waste, from your processes through, you start to learn about, philosophy first. So you're learning about, Toyota, and you're learning about, these different, I would say researcher, philosophers who really started working through, what does this mean? What does this mean to a manufacturer? So if you're talking about, Six Sigma, and you're talking about, really making something as efficient as it could possibly be, you're then incorporating lean on the back end, which is a mindset that questions everything. And so to me, it feels very intuitive. It feels very natural, which is, when you look at something, everything is continuously improving. And understanding that as the world around us changes, we also have to change. Our processes have to change. We cannot continue, to make assumptions, and we have to understand that our perception of what is value added is always going to change based on the demand that we're trying to meet. So,
Wow. Impressive.
at the end, it's common sense. It's one of those things where
Uh,
you think about it and you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I guess, if I wanted to do this a little bit faster, here's the step I would remove. And I think Amazon does a great job of it. So
I think Apple probably does too.
Apple, yeah.
So on today, like a typical day, I'm sure today's not since you're meeting with me, but on a typical day, what would be some of the tasks you would do?
On a typical day, it's really, and I would say for any one manager, no one day looks the same. But you're really balancing your time. So you're balancing your time between your people, and you're balancing your time between really understanding, what is it that we're doing, and are we continuing to drive value? And I would say as a leader, it's really an inverted pyramid where you're serving to remove the roadblocks from those who report to you. And you're really working each and every single day to understand, what are their needs, what are the needs of the business, are we, cohesively driving those together, and then aligning and realigning, as needed based on industry and market conditions.
So how many people do you supervise or have?
So right now I have 9. I had prior to this role, which I just stepped into this role officially on Monday. But prior to that, I had 3 teams of analysts with 3 supervisors in measurement. So,
and how many more on a team?
It really varied between the teams. There were about 22 people overall. So,
and a mix, men and women.
Very much a mix. I have found that diversity is good. You need both. You need both mindsets, and any one mindset can be. You see all kinds of different perspectives, whether they're male or female.
What do you do math on a regular basis then, on a daily basis of some kind?
I would say, if I wouldn't necessarily say I do math on a daily basis, but I definitely practice the type of thinking that math requires on a daily basis.
That makes sense. Yeah. Common that, yeah, but I can understand that.
Yeah.
That's to my level.
Yeah.
So what do you think you'll do next? What sky's the limit? What does Kandi want to do next? What are you wondering?
I have a couple of things, and I had to really think hard about this. When it came to establishing a bucket list and then becoming serious about executing against those things that I said I was going to do. And I do very much still want to write a book. I wanted to be an author since I was probably 4 or 5. That or being an astronaut. So,
a fantasy one or a real life one book? What would your book? Fiction or nonfiction?
I had really thought up until a couple of years ago that it was going to be fantasy fiction. Mm-hmm. And then I started to realize that my own story was pretty interesting, and that might be something to write about. And so I've done a few start and stops because I don't know that I'm quite ready to write about it yet. So I think that any endeavor like that takes a lot of emotion. So,
well, how early do you start your day each day?
Well, I wake up around 6 a.m., so nothing too crazy. And, get up, get ready. I'm very much a believer in removing your decisions as much as possible in the morning. So every Sunday evening, I prepare, all of the outfits. So my daughter, who's 5, has an outfit laid out for each day. I have my Monday work outfit already hanging in the bathroom. The rest of my outfits for the week are lined up, in my closet. And we already have a meal plan for the week. And so any food prep that I can do ahead of the week, if I can brown sausage, if I can do any of that, I try to get that done. Um, and this way when we get up, I'm not having to decide what outfit I need to wear. I'm prepared. I, can get us all out the door and then get here to work. And uh, I really enjoy my time in the car on the way to work. I drink my coffee then. I listen to music. I really enjoy, I would say, just having that moment and that reflection time where I'm neither a wife, a mother, I'm not at my job yet, and so it's just me.
And then how long do you stay at work? What time do you usually leave? Typically.
That depends on the demand. I really enjoy working. I think I enjoy working, and I don't mind, staying a little bit later. What I have found, the older that I get, the more important my family life work balance means.
Mm.
I don't know that I had a full appreciation for that. And, sometimes when I'm talking with people about it, it's because um, when I was first, in this salaried career, I was so determined to prove myself. And that was my focus, was to, prove myself and to really try and advance myself and my family's success. And I started to realize that that was at the cost. There was a cost built in there, which was, you don't have time to go to your daughter's volleyball games. And, there were things that I was giving up in order to move through that. And I think now that I have my youngest child and my oldest has gone off to college, I've realized how fast time really does go.
A little bit better at balancing.
I'm a little bit better at balancing, not perfect. I definitely have some days where, and I think everybody does, where you feel like you're failing on a front. You're either successful on one front and the other one, you forgot to, send in the picture order form. And everything's going smoothly at work, and then a meeting reminder that I've set for myself 6 months ago pops up, and I was supposed to take water for the Christmas party at school. And so, but what I think is the most important is that you extend grace to yourself. And it took me a while to be okay with that and to learn to treat myself as gently and as with much compassion as I was treating others around me, because I knew their struggles. But it was like I couldn't quite comprehend that, we were all in the same boat, and that I didn't need to beat myself up for, not being perfect across the board every single day.
Did someone like a mentor help you come to that, reach that point, or?
I think it was a variety of things. Um, People that were around me, my um, friend and mentor, Melissa, she was a great example of, you know, not being perfect is perfectly okay. And, that all these issues, all of these things, everybody feels them. We just don't talk about them. And everybody's trying to look perfect, and everybody's trying to look like they all have it together, when most of the time we're all kind of flying by the seat of our pants and you're just trying to make it work.
So it's not a 40-hour a week job.
No.
I mean, even if you wanted it to be, it doesn't sound like it could be. You have to
It's not.
ebbs and flows too. So
It ebbs and flows, and sometimes the pull is strong, and sometimes it's not. And you really have to take advantage of those moments and, be intentional about your time. That has been probably one of my biggest lessons, biggest, you know, I don't want to say resolution, but to be very intentional and to make sure that I'm making time for myself and make sure that I'm making time for myself to learn. Because I have found that, is that's one of those things that gives me energy. Mm-hmm. And if I'm constantly learning about something and I tell people I'm curious like a cat that's on its ninth life and doesn't care. And I just want to know everything about everything. And that's what gives me energy. And, I tell, my daughters, like, you need to figure out what it is that gives you energy and what sparks that passion, because most of the time, life isn't glamorous. And you're doing good if you like what you do and you're okay with doing what you do, but you don't have to love what you do all the time. And that's okay, because you can find that one thing that gives you that energy and passion.
Well, where do you think you get your curiosity, that drive from either parent or grandparent, or just it's who you are?
I don't know. I don't know. I just know that it's there. It's insatiable. It's, I begged and begged and begged and begged. I didn't beg. I dropped really hard and very clear hints as to what I wanted for my birthday. And so my husband, it was like surprise, but not surprise, because, I pretty much said, here's what I want, which was a masterclass subscription. Because, once I had seen that Neil Gaiman, was teaching a master class and, about storytelling, and he's one of my more favorite, kind of fantasy fiction authors. I was determined, to know more about this and who were all of these masters that were teaching classes. And it was, Bill Gates, and it was, people that are considered to be a master within their own field of study. And, it's this very candid, 4 to 6 hour session, where they teach you what they've learned and what their tips and tricks are.
Kind of like a webinar. I'm assuming it's not in person.
It is. It's not in person. And so I've learned a variety of things. I've learned how to be like a hip hop producer who produces beats, and he's considered to be the top of his industry, and a tournament poker player who, told his tips and tricks. And so, yeah.
And some of those you can translate into your
You absolutely can.
Hmm. So maybe 5 more years here, then PhD. Or be a mentor. I mean, are you a mentor to others?
I am. I'm pretty passionate about that.
That's just as well as you could be more personal, more directed at that too, I guess.
I thought, that was one of those things where I considered it even last year, which was, I wonder if I could be, like a guest professor. And
an adjunct.
And then thought, okay, but I have to have the time. And, but it's one of those where I do love to teach. I love to mentor. I have such a passion for the people around me. My journey in itself has inspired me to help others on their journey. I want to help someone to where, you always want to be that person in someone else's life where, they're incredibly successful, and, they always point back to someone who said something, who gave them a glimpse of what could be. And I want to pay that forward, because I definitely had that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Your story's a great one. It's really good. So, what are you currently reading? If you read so much, what are you currently reading?
So I'm rereading a fantasy fiction series, but only because I read the novella that came out and I liked it so much that I decided to reread the whole series because it's been a while. And it's by Patrick Rothfuss. I think that's his last name. It's called The Name of the Wind. Um, so I try to do a few pages a night. I also try to meditate. I think
Okay.
that headspace is very important. Um, and but yeah, that's what I'm currently reading. Although I usually have about 3 to 4 books that I'm kind of reading all at the same time, just depending on what mood I'm in. So
Wow. And the last thing you do before you leave for the day, plan what you're doing the next day.
I take a look at what's on my calendar for the next day, make sure that I'm prepared for meetings. I try to, you know, clean up in my head, everything, because I'm really trying to make sure that I can get home and I can switch those hats successfully, so that I can switch from a career professional to now I'm a mom who has a house full of chaos and 2 dogs and a cat and daughters, and there's lots of noise, and so I try my best to get things into a state where I don't have to think too much about them.
Laundry and dinner. You've
Laundry
already
and
planned the
dinner.
menu though, so you don't have to
I
think.
have planned the menu, and yeah,
Yeah. And do you help with homework?
yes. Um, Although it's really interesting, the other night one of the twins was like, "Do you know about the 4 phases?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. Like, what are we talking about?" And went into, mitochondria and this and this and this and this. And, so do you know if it was this? And I'm like, that's a great question. Like, I have no clue. um, so I would say I help with homework in the extent that I try to, help them get to the answer.
Yeah.
It's really funny. My husband and I both have very different tutoring styles. Um, if we're going to talk about, the universe, he's going to start with the beginning of time and work his way in a very linear progression. And I'm like, look, here's a tip and a trick for you. You don't have to quite understand it right now, but just do it, absorb it, and then you'll come to that understanding. And so we teach in two very different and separate ways. So, yeah.
And what's his job title? If you're,
So
is
he
this a
does
math?
So he does regulatory compliance. So he's doing a lot of coding. It's that same critical thinking, but his is very linear and very detailed. I'm more of the paint the big picture and the strategy and the vision, and it's going to be great. And he's the, okay, well, let's talk about the first step. How are we going to get there? So
I guess there's
it's a good pairing.
Yeah. Are there opportunities within the company for you to continue to move on up?
I think that there are. I think I know certainly my path. So I won't speak for everybody. I'll speak for myself. My path is very organic, and I actually like it to be that way. Moving from measurement to supply chain, for me, it was more around here are these buckets of subject matter knowledge that I don't really know. And I really feel like I want to add those to my toolkit before I really consider, maybe an upward progression. And so I really wanted to get well versed in negotiations. I wanted to get well versed in understanding, what were those economic drivers and market drivers for our company, and understanding really truly how could we implement, or come to a strategy that would, position our company to really truly be the best in class, which is something I believe in. And so I think that journey is going to take me in a lot of different places. I think that I could probably move sideways. I might go down a little bit because maybe there's a piece of knowledge there that I've got to pick up. But I think that as long as I am learning, as long as I feel like I have a good challenge, that continues to feed the fire.
That curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do they have programs within in the company for, I don't know, education or, I don't know, mentoring or whatever, different things?
Yeah, they have a variety of
Okay.
different, you have a talent pipeline development program. I've been through that. I really enjoyed it. They've also, they encourage mentoring up and down. And um, so, yeah,
Do they have a trouble retaining people once they get them? Do they have trouble keeping them?
I think it's like any other company where you have to continue to evaluate what are those tools of retention.
Mm.
And that changes. That changes as we have a different type of workforce coming in. And so what may have been a retention tactic over here looks very different for someone over here. What I will say is that as I see Williams continue its progression towards being very progressive and really listening to the needs of the workforce, I'm already starting to see, changes. And I was really excited um, when they announced, they announced family leave. But what this really is it also allows, fathers to have paternity leave. And that's not something that you see at every company, especially in this industry. And, I thought that it was really exciting. And I felt really excited about telling my 19-year-old, like, can you believe this? Like, we have this really cool policy in place now. And really understanding that, again, the needs of the workforce, if you just have to figure out what that is. And that also goes back to being a leader, which is understanding what motivates your people, what feeds their fire. And that looks different from one individual to the next.
So, as the head of a department, you meet with other heads of departments
Hmm.
at time too, and help plan the next wave or whatever, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that you're always looking to figure out how you can be diverse, because diverse thought leads to the best solution.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always looking for both sides, and that is you want the people who can poke holes in it because that way they show you where you have the potential to fail. And then you've got the people who are really helping to bring in the solutions for those. Um, but I also, back to your question, I didn't answer that very well. You're always thinking about, and especially during goal setting time, which is right now, how are we offering development? How are we developing our people? How are we encouraging them to grow? How are we retaining them? Um, what are those things that organically we can put into place that helps them see that they have a progression, that they're not stuck at any one position? That, and this is what I will say about Williams is that I had never seen a company before Williams that had promoted so much growth in between organizations and departments.
Mm.
And, if you were working, in one particular department, well, then you can move out within a couple of years to something else and learn that too. And I like the fact that it's promoting, not just depth and specialty in any one subject, but that we're also acknowledging the importance of breadth.
It's kind of like a machine and all the parts working together. And
Mm-hmm.
do you get to go out in the field any?
I do. There was a lull there, for a time when I was stepping in and we were really trying to do, a big system implementation. And so I was here in Tulsa for probably the better part of like a year and a half. I hadn't really done any traveling. But then I started going out to do that traveling again last year. And um, there's always and I attribute this to probably how I grew up, there's a quiet contentment that comes when you're riding along in a dirty truck, you've got your hard hat, you've got your FRs on, you've got your steel-toed boots on, and then you got your hands on equipment. And um, there's something also really peaceful and calm about that.
FRs or what?
So fire retardant clothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're going out to oil rigs? That's not the right word, I'm sure, but
Well, so you're going out to, like well sites.
yeah, okay.
So where, they're going out inspecting the meters that are measuring how much gas is flowing through the pipeline.
Were they any of the ones that you work with or responsible for impacted by the fires that we had out west last year or year before? Like
I don't
out west
believe
of
so.
Oklahoma. I mean, they were. I mean, there's some
They were
out there.
bad.
So yeah, I was thinking maybe. I mean, your company's got wells all over the place, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's got to be some out toward the Panhandle.
Yeah.
So you wear a hard hat.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Your own, or do they have just a whoever's going to get one?
I have my
You
own
have
hard
your own.
hat. It was issued to me by Chesapeake, so it has my name on the side of it, which is what they did to anybody who was in corporate getting a hard hat. So the running joke in the field was that they need to put the names of those corporate folks on their hard hats, so if they get lost, we can find them. And and I do remember that there was the option if you wanted a pink hard hat, you could get a pink hard hat. And I just remember just wrinkling my nose at that, like, why in the hell would I want a pink hard hat? Um, so yeah, I still have the same hard hat. It's got my safety stickers on it from different facilities I've been in where you have to go through really the safety training before you're really allowed to step foot into the facility and walk through. Um, so my hard hat sits next to my husband's hard hat. Our steel-toed boots are kind of both wrapped in plastic, sitting next to each other. Our, FR clothing is all kind of hung together. So yeah.
We need a picture of you all decked out.
I have a couple of pictures. It was really funny. I was 6 months pregnant with my youngest, and I was headed out to the field, and there happened to be a gentleman who had a baggier set of coveralls, and it was a light kind of material, so I wouldn't get too hot. And so I looked like a big blue Smurf out in the field. I had my hard hat on though, and I was laying on my side, and had a technician. I'd been really curious. I wanted to do a new install and help wire it up, and so yeah.
Is it one of the few women doing that sort of thing?
There are, that I know of, I think there are about 4 female field technicians. So,
Is that a large number or a small number in your mind, knowing what you know about
that
numbers?
is, I would say that that's incredibly uncommon to see, is a female in a field technician role.
What kind of educational background would they have to have?
I think really they're looking for more kind of technical skill sets, but I tell you what, I am constantly surprised, and it's always one of the most pleasurably surprising things when you're out and you're riding around with a field technician, and um, and you find out that they have a college degree. They're very articulate and very much at odds with what you think of when you see someone who's in the oil field, and they have the most fascinating stories to tell, and they just happen to be making a lot better money doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's always this perception that they're not bright enough or they're not smart, and I have found on almost every case that that is actually quite the opposite.
I'd give them credit for being quite
Yeah.
smart and willing to take chances too, because it's not
Mm-hmm.
always. It can be dangerous. I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Can be. Yeah. So give them some credit there. Oh, and they get their hands dirty.
Yeah, they get their hands dirty.
And get in the grease stuff. So let's back up just a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about, you said did women in science when you
Hmm.
were in college. So you would have had at least exposure to an early network of women that were in science through that.
There was an early exposure. I don't know, as a non-traditional student, that I knew enough to take advantage of it.
Okay, that would make sense too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're the first generation college graduate.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's pretty cool in itself too. Yeah. Did
Yeah.
your parents come to graduation?
They did not.
They did not.
Um, but I think it really comes around, what value do you assign to schooling?
Well, you got there.
I got there, and I think at the end of the day, as long as I'm proud of what I have done.
Did you celebrate in any particular way? Do you remember?
I did. We celebrated. I had a graduation party, um, and it was. I invited the math professors that I had grown close to, especially over the course of finishing the last 2 years, and invited Victoria, so Dr. Gadasik, and she and I, we had already started becoming friends, and then our friendship just deepened. And she's about 2 years away from retirement right now, and we stop in, she stops in, she stays the night, and there's just a lot of fondness there.
Do you think she did that with other young women, or she just took a liking?
I
Took
think
her
she
liking to.
did. She's very, um, she is what I would call the definition of feminist, and holds several degrees, PhDs, several masters. She had grown up in a family where she was the oldest, and there were a lot of kids, a lot of mouths to feed. And so she had determined that that wasn't the life for her. So she traveled. She opted to not have kids, and really just had a passion for learning. And so, I just I really appreciate, and I don't know that she will ever know how big of an influence she was in me getting to where I'm at now.
Put it in your book.
Yes, put it in my book.
Just hearing you say that, she probably saw a little bit of herself in you then.
Yeah.
A little bit. So common thread there. Well, what advice would you give young women today as far as career choices?
For young women today, and I will say this, today is so different than what it was even 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
For young women today, it's more about being okay with your true self, figuring out who your true self is, and really, I would say, holding steadfast to that, because I think that um, that's probably more under attack than anything else, which is, through social media. Um, it is it is more so in their space and around their heads and around everything that they do than I think it ever was. And, to hold on and to know that, as you're looking at careers, and, you're feeling like you don't have it all figured out, that's okay. You've got your whole life to figure it out. And just start doing what feels right and what feels authentic.
What do you tell your 4 girls?
That is what I tell my daughters. Yeah. It's okay. It's okay for interests to change. And that's the other thing, is I think sometimes we feel like our interest can't change. Maybe we'll get judged if our interest changes. And
Well, saying that, then, when you were proud to say that you were in criminal justice, were you just as proud to say I'm in math?
I was.
Okay.
If anything, I felt a little more proud to say that I was in math, because it wasn't something that I think anybody thought that I would ever do. I didn't think that I would do it. And then I happened to just fall in love with it.
Do you like the calculus or the algebra or the trigonometry? Which of those do you like?
So
Geometry.
So Calc 3 was my favorite. Dr. Jerry East. I remember him with a lot of fondness as well. And he was one of those professors, and there were a few others, but when you have someone who can synthesize such a complex subject into something that, is somewhat layman's terms, and is really passionate about teaching it and teaching it in such a way that the students understand it and they get it and it feels intuitive. To me, that is someone who is a master of their craft.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was the person I had for Calc 3. And then started Trig. I also had him for Trig. So I had, there was Dr. McNamara, Dr. Doherty, Dr. Chang, who was Dr. Doherty's wife. And so I would bring up my oldest daughter with me sometimes. And she would sit in the tutor room, and I would give her a college algebra book, to work problems through while I was working in the tutor room. And so,
I guess you have come a long way, just meandered in some ways, but with a purpose, always with that goal at the end, even though the goal may have changed a little bit, it's still driven.
Yeah.
I don't know, I guess having your dad came from Mexico, you said.
So my dad was born stateside.
His parents.
His grandparents came from Mexico. I think they settled in New Mexico, and then that's where his parents.
Making some of that drive that got them here may still be made if you track it back.
Yeah,
I don't know. Something I'm always interested in to back it up. Let's see what else. Okay, what else do we need to cover? Any major roadblocks or challenges? Any hurdles you've had to maneuver over or around?
I think this probably holds true for most people. Your biggest roadblock is often yourself. Mm-hmm. And that feeling of, there's no way I could do that. And moving into, who knows? Let me give it a whirl. And
Do you envision yourself always being in Oklahoma?
I don't know. I really enjoy going to other places. I enjoy traveling. I will say there is always a sense of coming home that I enjoy. And my house is very calm, very soothing. But I would like to give it a try, maybe live somewhere else. But, I do think at heart, my home is where my family is. So
I was going to ask, where do you consider home since you've moved?
We actually love Tulsa. We consider Tulsa home.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Not Clinton or Weatherford.
Yeah.
Was he from Weatherford?
He was from Weatherford, yeah.
But he's happy with Tulsa.
Yeah.
More trees.
There's a lot more trees.
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah. We moved from red dirt to trees, and we were like, this is amazing. This is gorgeous.
Yeah. I like Tulsa too. And we've covered your books. I wanted to know what you were reading. A particular skill set for a position you're in today?
A particular skill set, I would say the ability to think beyond the detail. And, that goes back to having a big picture perspective and understanding that, questioning even those things which you might feel shouldn't be questioned. And that's I think one of the skill sets I bring to the table, which is I throw out all assumptions. If it's, we've already tried that, there's no way that could be done. Oh, something can always be done. It's just about how much effort you want to put into it and is it worth it?
Do you keep a diary, a daily diary journal?
I have a journal. I mostly just journal whenever I'm feeling a little outside of my rational self, and so I need to put my feelings somewhere, and then I can make sense of everything. So
if you're wanting to be a writer, I'm thinking it would be good.
Yeah.
Do you have a personal philosophy or motto?
I don't think I have anything that doesn't sound cliche, because really my biggest focus and where I actually found that I started to become successful in both my career and feeling successful, just even on the home front, was being my true self and being okay with my true self, and realizing that, there are, we are all so multifaceted. No one's any one personality, and I can be fierce and, logical and rational. And on the other hand, I can be incredibly goofy, and I love, comedy. I think I would have been a comedian. I don't know. There was another path there that wasn't explored. Simply because I'm usually, I just find things funny and small things that are funny, and I'm making jokes, um, and I used to worry, and I think that, there was this persona that I was a very serious person, and I think it's because I used to worry that I wasn't polished enough. And now I simply don't care, and have realized that what's more important is that I be accepted for who I am, and that I'm going to bring every strength I have to the table. But wherever I'm at, it's most important that, I feel like it's a good fit, and, that there's a challenge there.
You're willing to step outside of your comfort zone.
I am, and it's so uncomfortable. And that's one of those things that I think you have to get past, which is that, again, that fear of there's no way I could do that. And just to say, maybe you're probably going to fall on your face a couple of times. That's okay, as long as you get back up.
Yeah, sometimes you fail, you learn a lot more from it.
You do, and if you're not failing, then you're usually not going outside of the box far enough.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite quote? Some people do, some don't.
Yeah, so there was one, I think it was by General Douglas MacArthur, and I read this when I was like a teenager. And for some reason, it struck with me, and at different points in my life, it's been important, which is, or allegedly, I'm going to say allegedly, this is what he said, which was, gentlemen, we are not in retreat, we are merely marching forward in another direction. And when life takes twists and turns, sometimes it's not failure, it's just you're not able to see around the corner that life is taking you, and just keep going, keep marching.
Would you change anything if you could?
There are definitely some life decisions,
but they all got you to where you are.
But they all got me to where I am today, and it has by far made me be the compassionate person that I am, because I've been in numerous situations, ones that I put myself into, to where I see something now. I see the young single mom who has the screaming baby, who looks like she's about to have a breakdown herself in the store, who's paying, with her food stamp card, and I have compassion, and, I'm always, I'm withholding judgment, and intentionally withholding judgment, because there are so many situations that I think I probably um, you find this interesting thing starts to occur where previously, when you were pretty judgy and a little, kind of self-righteous about something, inevitably you find yourself in that other shoe, and you're like, wow, so this is what it feels like. And I've been in enough of those situations to where it's taught me to extend grace and to have a deep pool of grace for those around me.
How do you think you've developed this so self-aware? You're self-aware now more so than you probably were back. I mean, what? How did you get there? Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's you have to. The biggest step is being honest with yourself and being honest with the ugly parts of yourself and acknowledging that we all have those, and not cringing away from it. And you know, to me, self honesty and being able to say, yeah, that's who you are, and that's what makes every single one of us messy human beings. I think that's the first step, which is just to be honest with yourself. And I think that started happening around probably 6, 7 years ago,
Yeah.
where
You begin to
I
reflect.
didn't shy away from that hard truth. And in fact, I looked at it and I'm like, I don't really like this. And, um, but that's okay because that just means that I see it, I acknowledge it. Now let me see what I can do about it.
And that was before your youngest was born.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you've had time to reflect and you've taken the opportunity to reflect.
Yes.
That's all of my questions.
Okay.
I have one last one. If there's anything else you want to say or that we haven't covered, you think we need to cover?
I don't think so. I think
You have done great, absolutely great. Then I usually end up with asking the question, how do you want to be remembered? How would you like people to remember Kandi Wilson?
Man, that's a big question.
It is. People don't always like it, so.
I think I would want people to remember me as someone who genuinely cared, who was very real, who was compassionate. And I think I would want them, to know that, I don't know. I think my legacy is important to me. The legacy that I leave behind. I want to have inspired as many people as many times as I've been inspired.
Can you name a few? You don't tell me the names, but can you list off a few in your head that you feel like you've already inspired?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
it's all about paying it forward.
Yeah. Well, I'm inspired just listening to you. You've been great. Thank you for sharing today.
Yeah.